Hello, people. Welcome back to another video by your good friend Chad Marco, the Big Anarchy. Make sure you guys check out my other social media and attack that like button and let's talk. So Thugger is free. The Thugnificent, the slime man himself, the slimiest of them all, the Snake King, the Five God. No, but rapper Young Thug is free, and if you guys don't know, he has been fighting a RICO case, I think for the past couple years, maybe like 2.5 to 3 years or something like that. And you know, Young Thug is one of the most popular rappers of our era. You know, he's been active for I think about around a decade or so. And I think that he won a Grammy, or he's been Grammy nominated, one of those. But basically very successful, millionaire, millions, billions of streams and whatnot. If you don't know about Young Thug, then you just must not be that into hip hop, you know. But the case that he was involved in was very serious, because the allegation was basically that his record label YSL was actually a gang, specifically a gang connected with the Blood gang, you know, the infamous Blood gangs throughout America, and that they were involved in multiple different crimes and even homicides and things like that. So that's why he was dealing with a RICO case. And if you're not aware of what a RICO case is, it's essentially a way for law enforcement to take down organized crime groups, you know, because it can be difficult to take down an entire group at one time, because you need to be able to link everybody and then connect crimes to them. So it's like, it's very useful for them, because one of the hardest things about taking down organized crime is that a lot of times, like, there's separation between the boss, underboss, the soldiers and things like that. So it's like, if a soldier killed somebody, how do we use that to take down the boss who actually gave the order for the hit? And that's why RICO cases are used, is to take down the entire group at one time. But again, you have to prove that everybody that you've got in this RICO case is somehow connected, and that the crime that he committed is linked to this guy, that guy, and so forth. So even though Young Thug probably wasn't riding around doing drive-bys himself, they were basically alleging that his record label was a gang and that they were doing a lot of bad things. But he beat the case, as people like to say. So it turns out, in fact, let me actually go to the article so we can get more specific details here. So this is an article from Yahoo News, and it says rapper Young Thug is a free man. Here are things to know about his plea. So he's free, but on the condition that he pleaded guilty to, I guess what you could say, lesser charges. So he's pled guilty, but the punishment is going to be much lighter than the sentence that he was likely going to get otherwise. And see, the reason why they gave him this, really, if you think about it, this slap on the wrist compared to what he could have gotten, is because if you've been following this trial, it's been very messy from the very beginning. It's costing taxpayers millions of dollars. Of course, you have the jurors whose lives are being disrupted for this case. It involves many different people, from the YSL members to, I think, hundreds of witnesses, all sorts of different evidence collected, lawyers, things like that. So this has been a very costly case in terms of time and money. And there have been several issues with this case along the way. I think there were several scandals surrounding Fannie Willis, who was really instrumental in orchestrating, you know, this takedown of YSL. She was connected to different scandals. Also, you had different witnesses who were not really cooperating, like really infamously YSL Woody, you know, who basically admitted that everything he said about YSL and Young Thug was a lie on the stand. And he was supposed to be one of their star witnesses, and he basically turned on them at the last minute. And so again, just a very messy trial. I remember there was one point where they were talking about locking up Young Thug's lawyer. It was just a fucking disaster. And I think that's why they've done this. They've seen that this trial was headed towards a mistrial, and then they would have to redo a lot of things. And they were like, fuck it, let's just give him a sweet plea deal that we feel comfortable with. But let's get more into it. So rapper Young Thug is a free man after pleading guilty to gang, drug, and gun charges. About 2.5 years after he was arrested on charges in a sprawling gang racketeering indictment, Young Thug was released from custody Thursday evening. It was a remarkable development in a trial that's dragged on and been plagued by problems. Jury selection at the Fulton County Courthouse in Atlanta began in January 2023 and took nearly 10 months. Prosecutors had called dozens of witnesses since opening statements last November in the trial of 6 defendants. So it took them 10 months just to get the jury. I'm telling you, like, this was very messy. Here are some things to know about the plea. Who is Young Thug? An Atlanta-based artist whose given name is Jeffrey Williams. Young Thug is known for his eccentric style, mumble rap, and squeaky high-pitched vocals. He shot to popularity with breakout hits including Stoner and Best Friend, yada yada. So we all know who Young Thug is. Let's see. What was he accused of? He was originally indicted and arrested May 9, 2022, and more charges were added in a subsequent indictment that August. The second indictment accused Young Thug and 27 others of conspiring to violate Georgia's Racketeering, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations Act, known as RICO. The rapper was also accused of participation in criminal street gang activity, as well as drug and gun charges. So this is something that you see a lot of times in hip hop, where you have these gang affiliated artists that are very popular and successful. They find it difficult to really completely leave the streets. And so even though they have all this success and money, what ends up happening is that they still dabble in street or crime activity. So they'll have their underlings or their friends and whatnot still like selling drugs, committing murders for them. Sometimes violence just happens as a result of the lifestyle. But also, like, just for example, you look at Fetty Wap. He was super big at one point. He had a string of amazing hit records, and now he's in prison because after his popularity died down, he turned to drug dealing. So again, this is very common in the hip hop community, where you have so many gang related or gang affiliated artists. Prosecutors alleged that Young Thug and 2 other people co-founded a violent criminal street gang in 2012 called Young Slime Life, or YSL, which they say is associated with the National Blood Gang. The indictment says Young Thug made YSL a well-known name by referring to it in his songs and on social media. So how did the plea come about? Prosecutors had been negotiating with Young Thug's lawyers to try to reach a deal that would end his participation in the long-running trial, but those efforts stalled when the two sides disagreed on conditions. Speaking to reporters after the sentencing, Young Thug attorney Brian Steele declined to discuss the negotiations. But he said prosecutors were pushing for outrageous conditions. They would let him out of custody, but they would have a tether around him so tight that it's unconscionable. So they were trying to get him to play out for a while, but they wanted to really have a tight, a tight hold over him as a condition of his release. Instead, the rapper went forward with a potentially risky non-negotiated or blind plea, meaning he was entering pleas without having a deal in place with prosecutors. He pleaded guilty to 1 gang charge, 3 drug charges, and 2 gun charges. He also entered a no contest plea to another gang charge and a racketeering conspiracy charge, meaning that he decided not to contest those charges, but could be punished as if he had pleaded guilty. Will he spend time in prison? No, as long as he abides by the conditions of his sentence. So Fulton County Superior Court Judge Paige Reese Whitaker gave him a total sentence of 40 years. The first 5 years were to be served in prison, but that was commuted to time served. Then he has 15 years on probation. Finally, a backloaded 20 years in prison will be commuted to time served if he complies with all of the conditions of his probation. If he doesn't complete his probation successfully, he would have to serve those 20 years in prison. So basically what happened was he has 15 years on probation. Now, it's supposed to be 20 with him serving 5, but they gave him 5 commuted because of the time he spent in jail up until this point. So that's out of the way. That's why he's coming home immediately. But the big issue is that he's going to be on probation for 15 years. Prosecutors wanted Young Thug sentenced to 45 years with 25 years in prison and the remaining 20 on probation. The charges against him carried a potential maximum sentence of 120 years. Prosecutor Adrian Love said, okay, so we're going to stop there. So that's basically the sentence and what he's going to be looking at. So this video is called, and we're going to get more to the probation aspect of it later. But this video is called Young Thug is Free, but is it a good thing? And this is like the main point that I want to kind of make here. Because even though I see all the excitement surrounding the release of Young Thug after fighting this long court case, I feel like this is another example of our problematic culture amongst Black people, African Americans, if you will. And what I'm saying is how we idolize and pedestalize these people who are quite frankly criminals and in a lot of different ways have been a menace to society and have endangered and harmed the lives of the communities that they've lived in or the communities that they've had an effect on. And see, this is something that we see all the time in hip hop culture, where some of the biggest artists are also tied to the streets or they're criminals. And they rap about it, they talk about it. And there was a time where it was suspected that a lot of rappers and whatnot were kind of faking it, you know, studio rappers and whatnot. Like, it goes all the way back to groups like NWA, where out of that group, the only member that was confirmed to be in the streets for real was Eazy-E. And even then, he wasn't like some super like gang member or something like that. You know, really overall, they were more musicians than street guys. But now we're seeing more rappers who are heavily and deeply tied to the streets. You have a lot of artists who make a ton of money or have made a ton of money selling drugs, and then they rap about it, they talk about it, and it's part of their image, it's part of their character, and we celebrate these people. And it's like, people don't realize that behind that image, behind the glamorous lifestyle, when you talk about somebody that is responsible for the selling of millions of dollars worth of hard drugs in their community, you're talking about somebody that is literally a cancer to that community. You know, we all know that the effect that drugs has on or have on people in terms of addiction, how it breaks up families, how addiction can lead people to committing crimes to satisfy those addictions, and then the violence that results from drug dealing because, you know, gang members fighting over territory or, you know, any little dispute that might happen between various gangs and drug dealers, and that leads to violence and the deaths of young men. I mean, this is something that a story we've heard time and time again. And I feel like there is so much, I wouldn't say hidden, but conveniently look past negativity that these artists are responsible for. And again, it's because of that image. And, you know, I get it, because a lot of that goes back to when you hear these stories of like prolific drug dealers and whatnot, and the fact that they always had the nicest clothes, the nicest cars, the baddest bitches. And like, these guys, even though they were actively participating in the destruction of their communities, they were superstars. They were really even superheroes, you know, because a lot of them, they would take that money and give back to the community, turkey drives, giveaways on Christmas and whatnot, and starting businesses and things. So I'm not saying like everything was negative, but I think the positive that they would do did not make up for the negativity that they were a part of. And now it's kind of even worse, because at least the super drug dealers, they would give back to the community a lot of times, even though they were destroying it too. They would also give back. But now you have these new artists that are just completely writing off of the fact that they're killers, that they are shooters, that they've killed people. They're not even giving anything positive back to the community. They're just like, I killed motherfuckers, and people love their story and the image and things like that. So, and again, these characters, these people, they're celebrated in hip hop. They're celebrated amongst black people, to the point where someone like Young Thug is getting released, and a lot of people feel good about that. They feel like he beat the system. They feel like he's some sort of like Robin Hood type figure. When if you've dove into YSL and the things they've been accused of, and what I'm saying is, of course, alleged, because it's not like I was there. But let's just be honest, as a people, even before all this shit went down, we all knew that Young Thug was a blood affiliated artist, that he was a gang affiliated artist. He talked about it, he bragged about it, he rapped about it, he wore the link, like everything was gang, blood, right? And when you dive into the various crimes that have been attached or linked to YSL, Young Thug, and his crew, you can see that these guys, they were doing things in their community that was overall making it worse. But because Young Thug raps great and got good songs and he's famous and rich, it's almost like we tend to look past that. It's just like the situation where Big Meech is coming home. Big Meech was a huge drug dealer really throughout the late 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And now everybody is, not everybody, but again, the black community, the hip hop community is excited about this prolific drug dealer coming home. And it's like, it's so silly when you think about it, because when you actually look past the glam, when you look past the money and the fame and the popularity of these guys, and you just look at what they did as far as the impact of the crimes they were committing on the people in the communities that they were a part of, it's like, why are we celebrating these guys coming home? Like, why are we celebrating these guys getting released? Like, we should be upset. We should be like, damn, but we're not. Again, I'm talking about black people as a collective. And I know not all black people feel this way. Too many do. Too many look at this and feel excited about Jeffrey coming home. And I just had to call that particular part of, or really what I think is a toxic part of our culture out. And I'm not the first one to do it. I've heard like Charleston White talk about this as well. I think more people are starting to wake up to the silliness of this relationship, or this way that we idolize artists, and how we tend to look past their faults and their wrongdoings because they make good music, or because they're charismatic, or they're likable somehow. And look, I'm not trying to control or say what other people should do. I'm just calling it out as being silly, But with that being said, let me step off my soapbox here. Let me step off the soap. I had to lecture my fellow blacks on this, but it's not like most people are going to give a fuck anyway, because Jeffrey's home. Yay. But in all seriousness, he beat the case. Well, in my opinion, I'll say this. I feel like this was actually a draw. And let me explain why. Now, like they said, he avoided serving prison time. But the big obstacle in front of him is that he's going to have 15 years of probation. Now, probation is no joke. Now, for someone like myself or you, Squares, we could survive on probation. I don't even smoke weed anymore. And dude, in fact, I'm going to say this. I know two friends that have been on probation, and not even for like super long. Like they had like 2-3 years of probation, shit like that. One of them, he went ahead and went to jail for 30 days over having to serve out I think he had like a year or two of probation left. And they gave him a deal that he could go to jail for 30 days and then get off probation. He went to jail, right? And endangered his life just to get off probation. And I hung around him and saw what being on probation was like. And the hardest thing for him was that he liked to smoke weed. And so having to get around those drug tests and things like that was very difficult for him. I have another friend that I just talked to recently, and he's going through something similar where he has basically, he's setting it up. Well, what he's doing is he's violating his probation on purpose. So he can just go ahead and serve out a few months in prison and then get out and then not be on probation. He said he'd rather go to prison for a few months than be on probation and not be in complete control of his life. So probation is no joke. And again, for us, we don't look at it like that because we look at the rules and we're like, okay, well, I can do that. But you got to understand, these guys are completely different. These guys have the streets in their hearts, in their blood, in their mind, everything. Like, most of their friends are street guys and bad influences and things like that that could potentially get them in trouble. And then you got to think about their habits. Now, all of a sudden, you know, you got to be drug tested. Now, I don't know what the exact terms of his, like, as far as like drugs are concerned, as far as is his probation, can he smoke weed? Because, you know, marijuana is becoming more and more legal or acceptable throughout the United States. So I don't know how that's going to go. But, you know, I'm sure that Young Thug is someone that smokes a lot of weed. I've heard that he is on like pills and things like that, or at least was on pills. So again, when you have these artists who have these habits, these indulgences, these vices and whatnot, and then part of your probation is that you can't get high or you got to get drug tested regularly, that's one of those demons that you now have to fight. If you don't figure that out, if you don't beat that demon of your drug addiction or your habit, then you're going to fail at completing your probation period and you're going to go back to prison. Not only that, like I said before, his affiliation with different gang members and things like that, he has to basically like restructure his entire lifestyle essentially. And this is why I say that it's a draw, because even though Young Thug is walking free, there is actually, in my view, I think that he's more likely to fail at probation than succeed. If I had to bet money, I would bet that he would fail it over complete 15 years. That's a long time where you have to not fuck up. And so this is the other thing too. What they have effectively done is put Young Thug in a situation where he has no choice but to change his life, or he's gonna go to prison. So, okay, we didn't get him locked up, but now his entire lifestyle has to be flipped. And part of the negotiation, part of the deal was that he has to do like these anti-gang talks or concerts, and he's banned from Atlanta for 10 years. So he can't go back to his, you know, his home city or his home base. And that might actually be to his advantage, since, you know, a lot of times our home is where, you know, the homies are at, and the homies can get you jammed up and shit like that. So that might be good for him. But, you know, when you look at it, they might not have as tight a rope around him as they could have gotten or what they have wanted, but 15 fucking years and you can't slip up. Again, you have no choice but to change. Literally, he got no choice but to change his life or go to prison. And so if you think about it, that's kind of a draw to me. And then on top of, like, cause it's the high likelihood of him fucking up. And even if he doesn't fuck up, that means that he basically had to abandon gang activity, criminal lifestyle, having switches, illegal drugs and things like that. So he got to be very careful. He has to be very careful and, you know, clean up his life for real. Like, he really has to change in order to complete his probation and avoid going to prison, you know. But he has so much to change for, you know. He has children, He has, I think he has I don't think he's married, but I think he has a girlfriend or a fiance. He has a family. He got so many fans, a lot of success, and so much more potential that he can tap into. He has every reason in the world to turn his back on the life of a gangster or gang member and live clean. But like I said, I always say this, at the end of the day, you are who you are. It's very difficult to do a 180 overnight, and then you got to maintain that for 15 years. Very difficult. But this is my last point that I'll make on this. Like I said, in order for Young Thug to complete his probation, he has to change his life, and he has to give up on blood, gang, slime, all that shit, and you know, he has to do his 180. But from the perspective of gangs, of bloods, whatever you want to call it, I don't think they should be upset. And this is where I think it is a kind of a win for YSL and Young Thug. If you think about it, Young Thug was, as a blood, or allegedly, as an alleged member of the blood gang, he was able to reach such a height of success that he was allegedly the boss of a criminal organization, allegedly, and was giving out orders to knock people off, and you know, basically all these things that he was accused of by law enforcement, the prosecutors, and then get caught in the midst of all that and not even have to go to prison. I think that if I'm a gangster, if I'm street code guy, don't be mad at Young Thug if he does his 180. Don't be mad at him if he denounces gangs and detaches himself from all that. Because if you think about it, this is just like an athlete finally retiring, right? Like, I think at this point with this sentencing, if he can stay on the straight and narrow, you can look at it like, look, he took this gang shit to the absolute height of what he could and put in work, allegedly, and was a boss and put on as much as he could. And then, you know, he made it all the way to the courthouse and even got out of that, more or less. Don't be mad at Young Thug if he turns his back on this shit. Like, Young Thug to me is now retired. Like, retire his red jersey. You know, go ahead and hang it up. He's hanging up he's hanging up his switches. He's hanging up his red rag. Don't be upset. Don't cry. Like, this is just his retirement. He put in all the work that he could before they finally got him. And even when they got him, he beat the case, kinda. Don't weep. Don't hold it against him. I think at this point, let the man walk off into the sunset and retire from this bullshit. And just be a family man. Let him be an artist. Let him be a father. Let him be a husband. Let him be Jeffrey Williams from now on. You know, don't hold it against him. He did as much as he could and made it all the way to the summit and didn't even get knocked off. So, but that's my take on Young Thug being freed. I hope you guys enjoyed that video, and I'll see you in the next. So, Johnny.